CEO, Dr. Craig Dunn, and the entire WIF team. It's a privilege and a joy to serve with them. And also, you've already heard, but I have two colleagues with me, good friends. Isaac Hess is our Senior Account Manager at West End Investment Foundation. We also have with us Greg Brooks, who is our Vice President of Business Development. And I'm really grateful those guys could come. They've never been on the campus, so it's fun for them to be able to come and to see the experience and interact with you when we have opportunity to do that. So I'm glad they're here. They're actually here to make sure I do a good job and don't mess anything up. So please don't throw anything at me until I'm done. Actually, they do have an important task. There's a couple things. First of all, when you all leave, we're going to give you all a free book. Right Living, Right Giving. It's a devotional, spiritual journey to generous lifestyle. So we have a copy for all of you if you don't already have one of those. And then one lucky person is going to walk out of here with a brand new iPad Pro. And they're going to determine how that's going to take place. So what I said was you have to be present and awake to receive it. I say that, I think I was talking to Mike. Some of you left at 3:30, got up at 3:30 this morning to get here. Anybody else get up early? You got up at 3:30? No? Well, thank you for doing that. Speaking of being awake, I'm reminded my father pastored for over 45 years in the West End Church. And I remember years ago he pastored a church in upstate New York. And after the service, he was shaking hands with a gentleman. His name was Homer Mead. He worked in an orchard, so he got up early. And they had trouble staying awake in church. And one Sunday after service, he was shaking hands with my dad, and he said, "Pastor, we have to do something about the flies in this church. One of them kept me awake the whole service." And so if I see you falling asleep, I need you to know that I've commissioned all the flies in Oklahoma to come help you. I hope I don't put you to sleep. I'm a lot excited for the opportunity to share with you. And I'm also a little bit terrified because I have 2 3-hour workshops and 1 30-minute message that I've crammed into 29 slides that we have to get done here in less than 45 minutes. So a lot of content, but I'm excited to share it with you. Once again, how many of you are students here at the university? That's really exciting. It really is, honestly. It's exciting to see you here. How many were the ones that get extra credit?
Just required.
You were required, so you didn't have any choice.
Yeah, my professor's making me write a 2-page thing about it.
2 pages. Wow. Well, I hope I make it worth your while. Glad you're here. How many pastors? And any other guests from the community, faculty, staff, university? Thank you. Glad you're here. I appreciate you being here with us. Well, I'm going to pray and we're going to get started, all right? Father, thank you again for this opportunity to be able to share today. We pray that you would make your presence known to us. I truly need your help, so I pray that you'd step in, speak through me, use me, hide me behind the cross, and help us to get excited about creating a culture of generosity with the people in our churches. And so I pray that you would guide us through, be with Randy as he shares with his group upstairs, and help us to have a great afternoon together. We pray in Jesus' name. Several years ago, I got to go through a coaching experience for personal growth, and I actually did it with my brother. He has an organization, and his website is myipsat, ipsat.com, myipsat.com. Just a shameless plug. It was one of the best experiences I had through personal growth, and you can interact with that if you would like to do that. During that time, I developed my personal mission statement, which is to teach, model, encourage, and affirm the principles of whole life stewardship, calling and equipping people of faith to be financially fit so they can live the generous life and help to fund the fulfillment of the Great Commission. I don't know if that'll fit on a business card, but that's my personal mission, and I've been passionate about it for a long time, and it's something that I get to do almost every day at WIF by assisting Craig and the team as we partner with people in churches to build the kingdom. So out of my passion for stewardship and generosity, and in keeping with our theme, funding your church's vision, I want to share with you about something I'm calling the generosity factor, not to be confused with Ken Blanchard's book by the same title. I'm sure it's a great book. I need to read it. And so the first half of what I'm going to share with you is mostly informational, so buckle up and hang on. We're going to move pretty quick. Towards the end, then I'm going to try to do a little storytelling and share with you some personal stories of ways that God has worked and blessed in my life. Somebody's, okay, I got it. So let's get started here. What is the generosity factor? Let me explain to you what I mean by that. I believe the generosity factor is what happens when people of faith learn to manage well what God has entrusted to their care. When they bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, we'll talk more about that later. Learn to live the generous life, commit themselves to help fund the fulfillment of the Great Commission, and then experience the blessing and favor of God. One thing I need to tell you, don't worry about taking notes. I'll send you my slides. Okay, you just email me, or I'll give them to the university. You can ask for them, you can have them all. Let's save you a little time. We're going too fast. I appreciate that.
My name will not be heard.
Good. I don't blame you. Just a couple of things I want to mention. First, you'll notice that I listed bringing the whole tithe in before living the generous life. And the reason for that is I don't believe tithing is being generous. I believe tithing is being obedient. There's a difference. And I'm going to talk more about that a little bit later. Second thing is I want to acknowledge that there are many ways that we can be generous and live the generous life, and I know that. But for our time together this afternoon, I want to focus more on being generous with the financial resources that God has or will entrust to our care. And then the last thing, I wanted to clarify that whenever I mention the blessing and favor of God or living the blessed life, I'm not talking about a health, wealth, prosperity, name it, claim it gospel, where we perceive God's blessing as a right or something that we deserve. Actually, I'm thankful that in His mercy, God doesn't give me what I deserve. But there is such a thing as living the blessed life, and when we get near the end, I want to talk more about that, but I wanted you to know what I meant by that. So, why the generosity factor? Why is this so important to me? After nearly 40 years of ministry, and it'll be 40 years in July, there are still a lot of people in this world who need the Lord. You know that, I know that, you know who they are. Some people even in my family. And so there's a lot of people who still need the Lord. The ministry of the local church, I believe, is God's primary method for reaching the lost. There are other great organizations, missions, sending organizations, who are reaching the lost, parachurch organizations, and I don't want to discount any of the work that they're doing. It's great. But I am convinced that the ministry of the local church is God's primary method for reaching the lost. God's plan for funding the ministry of the local church is with the tithes of His people. I believe that, and I'll talk more about that in just a little bit. And I also am convinced that many people of faith are not tithing today, either because they are not aware of the biblical principle of tithing. Maybe they didn't grow up in the church today, and so they were never exposed to the concept of tithing, and that's certainly fair. In our culture today, there are a lot of people coming to our churches, and I'm excited about that did not grow up in the church. I did, maybe some of you did, and we were exposed to that concept, but they were not. Or they haven't applied the biblical principles of tithing. Perhaps they don't think they can afford to tithe. You know, people like that. Or they haven't made it a priority in their life yet. Or they don't agree with the biblical principle of tithing because they don't believe that tithing is either relevant today or required in Scripture. So there's still a lot of people that have not made that a priority in their life. And finally, I'm convinced, and this is really the premise of what I'm going to share with you this afternoon and build on this. I am personally convinced that if every believer brought the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there would be more than enough resources to fund the ministry of their local church. I know churches that are doing this, and God is blessing, and great things are happening. And I believe there are certainly other ways that we can fund the ministry, but I believe this is God's plan and God's intention. Now, let's consider the need and why it's so important for us to live a generous life. Of the 7.7 billion people living today, approximately 2.8 billion live on less than $2 a day. 1.3 billion have no clean water. 790 million go to bed hungry every night. And here's the kicker for me. Nearly 2 billion people have never heard in the way they would understand. For God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son, that whosoever believes in Him will not perish, but have eternal life. Now consider the resources that are available to us, at least in our country, to meet these needs. While Americans represent only about 4% of the world's population, they possess around 30% of the world's wealth. And there's currently around $41 trillion that will be transferred to the coming generations over the next few decades. You're probably wondering, where's my share of that? Ron Blue, author and Christian financial planner, has stated that 80% of the world's evangelical wealth is in North America. And the total represents way more than enough to fund the fulfillment of the Great Commission. And I take that as a word of authority from Ron, who I was privileged, Isaac and I, to be with Ron at a conference a week ago in Florida at the Kingdom Advisors Conference. I had a chance to just briefly spend some time with him. He's been one of my heroes in the faith for a long time, and certainly one who's well versed in stewardship and financial planning. And so I really appreciate that. I believe that most, if not all, Christians want to live a generous life. I personally have not met someone, a person of faith, who said, I do not want to be generous. I really believe it's in their DNA. Chris Hodges, lead pastor at Church of the Highlands, says most people of faith aren't stingy. They're just financially strapped. So it's generally not a lack of desire, but it's a lack of capacity. And that's what I have found to be the case. And the capacity to give comes when we trust God and manage well. So how does someone manage well? Well, that's a good question. So in the next few minutes, and I'm going to be flying through this, so hang on, I'd like to share with you 10 basic steps that I believe will help us manage well so that we can live the generous life. These steps are not necessarily new or revolutionary. Dave Ramsey will teach very similar principles. There are many others. Ron Blue's Managing Your Money, who will share these principles with you. But I believe that if we follow these steps, we will be well equipped to live the generous life. So here's step one. Hang with me. There's 10 of them. I'm going to run through them. This is the 3-hour workshop right here. If I had more time, I would not only dive in deeper, but I'd provide you with handouts, resources, online links, all kinds of stuff that would help you put together your own personal financial plan. So if you have interest in some of those things, just email me. I'd be glad to share them with you. Here's the first step, which I believe is the most important step in the process. If you don't get this one right, I think you're going to be challenged in the rest of your personal financial journey. And this, I believe, is the biggest roadblock to people living the generous life. And so the first one is to put God first. Put God first in your personal finances by tithing 10% of your income to God through your local church on a regular basis. Now, I don't know where everybody stands on the concept of tithing. I'm going to talk more about this a little bit later, but hang in there with me. Malachi 3:10, many of you probably know this well, says, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. The full tithe meaning 10%. And if you study through the entire scriptures and know the theme of this, they were to bring the first and the best of their harvest or livestock, the first fruits, if you will. Deuteronomy 14:23 in the Living Bible says the purpose of tithing is to teach you always to put God first in your lives. In Matthew 6:33, many of you can probably quote it. It's been a life verse for my wife and I, and a priority for us. And it says, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. What are these things that will be added? If you know in the context of the scripture, it's what we eat, what we drink, what we wear, the basic necessities of life. Seek first the kingdom of God. Now, as I've already mentioned, there are some people of faith who say that tithing is no longer relevant. And what I hear often is the fact that we should follow the New Testament model for giving. The ironic thing about that is that almost every example of giving in the New Testament goes way beyond the tithe. Randy Alport addresses this in his book, Money, Possessions, and Eternity. He says, being under grace does not mean living by lower standards than the law. In Matthew chapter 5, Christ systematically addresses issues like murder, adultery, and the taking of oaths. And he made it clear that his standards were much higher than those of the Pharisees. He never lowered the bar. He always raised it. I know for me personally, I have never felt that it was right for me to ask God to bless my life and my financial journey if I was not first willing to trust him and to bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. And that is key for me, is trusting God and walking in humble obedience. Step 2 is plan for the unexpected, because the unexpected is going to happen. And when it does, it usually costs money. So how do we prepare for the unexpected? Start by creating a temporary emergency fund. I'll talk more about fully funding that in a moment. Save $1,000 for short-term emergencies, whether it's a flat tire, some other breakdown in your car. If you have a home, the hot water tank goes out in the middle of a shower, furnace, whatever it is, save $1,000 for short-term emergencies. How do you do that? Well, use a tax return. My grandson has his first job working at a Kroger grocery store. He's worked for a year now, he got his tax return, he got $918 back. So I said, buddy, you're on your way to an emergency fund, get that in a savings account. Maybe you get a special bonus, cash gifts, or any unexpected income. When I was in undergraduate school, my grandmother sent me $10 a week. If I'd saved all that money instead of going to McDonald's, I'd had my emergency fund when I graduated. Use these funds when you incur an unexpected expense, and when you use them, because you will, be sure to replace them immediately because you'll have another reason to use those. A recent survey found that around 60% of Americans, 60% had less than $1,000 in total savings. 34% of Americans had absolutely no savings at all. When you don't have that, your only alternative when something unexpected comes up is to borrow it, put it on a high interest-bearing credit card, and it immediately derails your financial plan. It robs you from the opportunity of living the generous life. I have more stories, but not enough time. Let's keep moving. Step 3 is to have a budget. That's a dirty word in personal finance for a lot of people. 6 out of 10 families in America do not have a budget, 60%. I think that everyone should have a budget, no matter how much or how little you make. It helps you know where every dollar is going, so you're not flying blind and wasting money. So how do we do that? Real quick, start with your values. I believe you should start with the things that are important, especially based on your commitment to Christ and what's important to you. For example, charitable giving, saving, paying bills on time, or better yet, paying them early. Then list your net spendable income, what you bring home, what you're able to use for buying and paying your expenses, not including bonuses, overtime pay, cash gifts. Don't put in the random things like I get $25 a year for my birthday from my grandma. You can't count on all of those. List your net spendable income. Then you list your fixed expenses, including your tithe. Make that a priority in your budget. Savings, your mortgage payment, utilities. Then list your discretionary expenses like eating out, entertainment, subscriptions. You realize how much subscriptions add up to just in Apple devices? Your streaming subscriptions and all the other subscriptions for your sports and everything. It's staggering. And what about Starbucks? I've read that people can spend anywhere from $3,000 to $6,000 a year going to Starbucks. It adds up quick. And then create a budget, either on paper or an Excel template. And these are the resources I have. If you don't have these, I have some pretty comprehensive templates. Be glad to send it to you. An Excel worksheet that you can use, but you need to have a budget, whether it's on a piece of paper. Somewhere you should have a budget. I have one on my phone, and I use it on a regular basis. And then when you create your budget, build in a 10 to 20% margin between your income and your expenses. And if you can't do that, then work at creating that margin. It's important for you to explain why in just a few minutes. Then manage your monthly cash flow, so it's doesn't end when you create your budget. The trick then is trying to match up the due dates for your payments, your bills, with the days your pay is coming in. And so there's a little cash flow management, and I have a worksheet that will help you do that as well. I'd love to send that to you if you ask me for it. And then review your budget regularly to be sure you're on track. Do it at least once a year, and then balance your checkbook regularly to keep track of where your money's going. Step number 4, eliminate short-term debt. The average American has 3 credit cards and an average of $16,000 of credit card debt. So let's work on that. First, retire debt starting with the smallest debt as it relates to the total amount owed per debt, and then move on to your next largest debt. Using the margin you created, that's why you want to create this margin. This is where you're going to carve out that money to start retiring or eliminating those consumer debt or credit card payments that you have. So use the margin you created in your budget, make the minimum required payment on your debts, but pay extra on the smallest debt until it's paid off. And during this time, try not to take on any new debt. And eventually you might work on eliminating your auto loans and mortgage. And this strategy is known as the debt snowball. You've probably heard of it. And it's designed to help you experience success early and stay motivated to retire off your debt. Incidentally, in both Android world and Apple world, there's an app called Debt Snowball. And it helps you manage and chart and plot this out, and it's easy to follow. It will help you. Now, having said that, not all debt is bad. There may be times when borrowing money is appropriate, maybe even necessary, but having no debt is definitely better. And I believe that's true for a church as well, even though I work for a church loan fund. Step 5, hang in there, we're halfway through, is your emergency fund. So now you're going to fully fund your emergency fund. And the way you do that is to try to get to where you have at least 3 to 6 months of net income. And really the rule of thumb here is if you lost your job, and some of you here still, university students, you may not be in this position yet, but when you're out and you're working in ministry, if for whatever reason you lost your ability to earn income, how long would it take you to find a position or a job to be able to replace that income? That'll help you determine whether you need 3 or whether you need 6 months worth of income. Use funds from the margin you created, as well as, assuming you paid off your short-term debt, use these funds previously allocated to pay down short-term debt until this account is fully funded. Use these funds for times of unexpected unemployment, medical emergencies, and when you use these funds, be sure to replace them immediately. Only 18% of Americans say they could live off their savings for at least 6 months. And God forbid you ever find yourself in that situation, but if you did, you want to be ready for that. Step 6, personal savings account. So a temporary emergency fund, your budget, eliminate debt, fully fund your emergency fund, but keep savings. So once your emergency fund is fully funded, don't stop saving. Continue to place funds in a personal savings account beyond your emergency fund. Set specific goals for your personal savings, like vacations. It's good to have time away to relax and be refreshed and renewed. Jesus came apart from the crowds. I heard someone say, if you don't come apart, you'll fall apart. So you need that. Major purchases like furniture, something else you need around your home, plan for it, save for it. Down payments on a car or a home. Pay extra principal payments on a mortgage if you have one. So that's what these accounts are for. But for me, the most important, greatest benefit of having reserve funds above and beyond your emergency funds is to generous giving above and beyond the tithe. If you don't do this, then you've not created an opportunity. And I don't know how many of you this happens to you, but there's been more than a few times early on in mine and Karen's financial journey where we were paying our tithe, but we had never really set anything aside. And there were times when I would hear of a need that was presented, an opportunity that was given, and really a tug on my heart to say, I'd really like to help step up and do something there. And I hadn't planned and prepared for it. And so this is a great way for you to be in a position, again, to live a generous life. Place these funds in a high interest bearing account. If you don't know where that is, ask these guys, ask me afterwards. WIF has a very competitive deposit rate for deposit accounts. If you didn't know that, you can place funds on deposit with WIF, and we'd love to talk with you more about that. Step 7, minimize risk with insurance. Now, I know that the topic of insurance is boring. I remember right now, when late afternoon, it's after lunch, this is nap time, and now we're talking about insurance. And I have met some people who think that insurance isn't necessary, but I really believe that purchasing insurance can be an act of good stewardship. Paul writes in 1 Timothy 5:8 that if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for his immediate family, he is denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Insurance is just another way of protecting and providing for our family. So here are the main types of insurance that most people should be familiar with. Disability insurance in case you have a long-term disability. Life insurance to protect your family if you should die prematurely. Health insurance to cover any type of hospital stay or medical concern. Property insurance to protect your home and auto. Liability insurance in case of an incident resulting in legal action. And long-term care insurance in case you require a stay in a nursing home. Again, if one of these situations would happen to occur and you didn't have some kind of protection, it could put you in a very difficult position financially. Some of you probably know people that have faced financial disaster and catastrophe because they didn't plan and manage well and didn't have a way to protect themselves through minimizing risk with insurance. Step 8, I know for you university students, this seems like a far, far away place to prepare for retirement. It's sneaking up on me rather quickly, and the exciting time in the market has been a fun ride for anybody that's getting close to retirement. Studies show that more than 65% of Americans retiring today are not financially prepared for retirement, and 42% aren't saving anything at all for retirement. These are people that will be in your churches. So these are the challenges that they're facing and the things that we can do to help them to plan well, manage well, and be prepared to respond in obedience to God and living a generous life. So these are things I think we can help them with.
So out of your margin, again, I mentioned this, invest 10% of your gross income in a tax-deferred retirement account. Choose the proper asset allocation, which will depend on your investment objectives, which means simply, what are you saving for? And in this case, we're talking about retirement. The risk tolerance, which if you didn't have a very strong tolerance right now, with what's been happening in the last few days, you would have an upset stomach and have trouble sleeping at night. So it's how you respond to volatility in the market. I have a risk tolerance questionnaire, investor profile questionnaire if you want it. It can help you kind of figure out where you land in that. And then the third thing is the time horizon. How long do you have to save, as well as how long do you need these savings to last? The sooner you start, the better prepared you will be. So don't let it go. Do an annual projection to make sure that you're on target with your retirement savings plan. Many people, even if you have an organization that's paying into retirement for you, you never really check to see, when I finally get there, is it going to be enough to provide adequately for my family and for me, for my wife and me if we're married, whoever, if you're married. And so you have no idea, you're just kind of hoping that it's all going to work out. And so I really highly recommend that you do an annual projection. There's some great online tools, calculators that are free, 2 of them, that will help you do this and make life easy for you. Then check your Social Security benefits and understand how Social Security works. Hang in there, we're getting close. Step 9 is save for education expenses. Now, according to an article on CNBC, student loan debt is over $1.6 trillion. And they say that hardly anyone is paying down their loans. They're just making interest payments due to limited cash flow, which only increases the total amount they will pay. I don't know if some are hoping and waiting for an election and somebody who will come and forgive all their student loan debt, but all I can say is this: funding college expenses will be one of the biggest challenges for the average family. But I also want to make sure you hear me say this: but with God's help, you can do it. And I'm going to talk more about that in just a little bit. I would suggest that parents fund your retirement first, because if you don't, then you want to make sure it's okay for you to move in with your children when you get ready to retire, because you've spent all your money putting them through college. So fund that first, take care of your own financial security and future, then you'll be in a better position to help them when they need it. Then I suggest determine if the parents will pay. That would be great if you had parents who had the wealth and the resources to be able to just pay that bill for you. Maybe not. Maybe it's good for you to have a little skin in the game. So will the student be paying for it? But surely you would love to have some help along the way, or will it be a combination of both? I can tell you, in my family, I have 2 children. They both one went to Indiana Wesleyan, one went to Southern Wesleyan. Nobody in my family has been to Oklahoma Wesleyan yet. My brother went to Kingswood, my dad went to Houghton, I went to United Wesleyan College. Oh, we gotta get them out here, so we'll find a way. Work closely with your university admissions finance team. They know what they're doing. They have great counsel and wisdom. That was a big help to Karen and I when we were going through school. Here's some options: scholarships, grants, work-study programs. My wife was smart, so she was able to take advantage of the scholarships and grants. I wasn't as smart, so I took advantage of the work-study programs and patched roofs on campus in the summertime. It was good work. There's student loans, there's Parent Plus loans. Just remember, with Parent Plus, you're on the hook for that. As far as co-signing, education savings accounts, 529 plans, and there may be other options. Please talk with your university team, and they'll help you. Like I said, paying for education expenses is hard, but with God's help and provision, you can do it. My wife has 2 earned degrees, and I have 4 earned degrees, and with God's help, we were able to pay for all of them ourselves. And I want to talk to you more about that again later, because I want to share with you how God helped us with that. 10, and then we're going to transition to another section here. Develop an estate plan. Now this probably really seems like really far away, especially for university students, but for those of you that are here, I think all of us, this is something important and we need to think and talk about. The first important thing is to create a will. 7 out of 10 people in America do not have a will. 70% of Americans. And the truth is, you actually do have a will. Your state has a will for you. And you know who the #1 charity is in that will? The state. Okay? And of those who do have a will, George Barna says only 1 in 9 people leave anything to their local church. When asked why they didn't, it said because no one ever asked. So when you're in local church work, I really encourage you. I directed our churches, our denominations, estate and gift planning stewardship ministries office for 5 years. and host estate planning workshops with people that you trust, advisors you trust, and give your people the opportunity to plan, to bless the church and ministries that are near and dear to them from their estate. Probably the single largest gift that most people would ever be able to make to their local church would be out of an estate gift. And so we don't give them the opportunity or talk with them about it, they'll never know. So create a will, consider a revocable living trust. You may not know what that is. Here's where I would take 3 more hours just on this subject alone and dive deeper into this. A revocable living trust is basically if you have assets you own by title, like a home or property, and you want to avoid the expense and delay often associated with probate or benefits. It's not always the right thing, but consult with a financial advisor who can help you. Establish power of attorney for healthcare and finance. It can be the same person, but it doesn't have to be. You can have different people functioning in those roles. Make an advanced directive or living will, which is how you would let medical professionals know what heroic measures you want or don't want them to take on your behalf. Designate beneficiaries for bank accounts, investments, and insurance. And just keep in mind that a designation of beneficiary will supersede any instructions you have in your will or your trust. So make sure they're synced up, or it's not going to happen. For example, you maybe have a life insurance policy, and you only had 1 child at the time. Later you had 2 or 3 other children, and you maybe have named them in your will or your trust, but you never updated your life insurance. It's only going to that 1 child if you don't update it. The will not direct that. It's directed by the designation of beneficiary form. And then name guardianship for minor children. And that you can only do that through a will. If you don't do that, the state then will make that determination for you, and it may or may not be the choices that you would make. All right. Let me switch gears here and share some suggestions for creating a culture of generosity in the local church. So if you are, how many of you university students are looking going into ministry? And how many in business? Okay, all right. Well, let me share with you first some statistics regarding the giving habits of people in the local church from an article by the PushPay organization. They're an online giving solution provider, okay? First of all, religious giving is down about 50% since 1990. So it's staggering. It's just continually dropping off. And so it just goes to show how important it is for us in the local church to create a culture of generosity and to help people live up to their giving potential and know what that means. Only 10 to 25% of the typical congregation actually tithes, a 10% tithe to their church. On average, Christians only give about 2.5%, and I think that stat is old. I think, Jim, you were telling me it's down to 2% now. Recurring givers annually donate 42% more than one-time givers. So you have people in your church who may be high net worth, have high income, and so they make a big gift that's bigger than anyone else would ever make at one time. But statistically, recurring givers who just give a little bit every time they get paid, the first fruits, the tithe, actually give 42% more than the one-time givers in your church that maybe write a check for $10,000, but never come close to giving a full tithe over the course of the year. Donors aged 49 to 59, this is important, who would likely give online went up 20% from 2010 to 2015. And I'm beyond that age group. I'll be 64 in May. But that's pretty cool to see the transition in technology. My mom's 84 and very proficient at texting, online banking. So this is coming. So be watching for that. And then baby boomers make up nearly half the entire donor population. So don't honk us off. Right? Stewardship in the local church. Okay, so here are a few suggestions for ways we can create a culture of generosity in the local church. Not all of these are original with me. Some come from my father, as I mentioned, pastored in the Wesley Church for over 40 years, I think 45 years. And some come from my friend, Dr. Stan Toller, who served for 50 years as pastor, district superintendent, and general superintendent with the Church of the Nazarene. Both of these gentlemen have recently moved to heaven, but their legacy lives on. So here are some suggestions. First of all, be intentional and develop an annual stewardship plan with your board and your finance committee. Involve them so there's some input and some buy-in, but do this on an annual basis. Be intentional. Have a plan of how you're going to create a culture of generosity with your church families. Provide an ongoing program of stewardship training and discipleship in your congregation, not a once and done, but put it on a regular cycle so people are being exposed either to Financial Peace University estate planning opportunities for them to shore that up, and create opportunities for them to do some gift planning and estate planning. And then make sure your board and staff and church leaders are committed to the principles of biblical stewardship, beginning with the tithe. Once a year, my dad had each member of his local church board anonymously respond in writing to two basic questions during a board meeting. First question was, do you have meaningful time alone with God on a regular basis? Good question for people that are in church leadership. The second question, do you tithe 10% of your income to God at this local church? And then you would have the board secretary collect the responses and then verbally report the number of yes and no responses to the board. Now, my father never knew how anyone specifically responded, nor did he know how much anyone ever gave to the church. But this simple exercise was a gentle reminder of what he felt were important qualities for spiritual leadership in the local church. If these people are the ones making decisions regarding how the money of the church is going to be spent, then they should be committed to giving and supporting the ministry of that church. And so I thought that was a good exercise. Have an annual stewardship emphasis month. My dad always did this in January when most people are thinking about their goals for the coming year. It doesn't mean you have to do it then. Anytime works best for you, that's fine, but have one on an annual basis. Host an annual vision banquet, because John Maxwell says money follows vision. Chris Hodges says leaders set the vision, but the people determine the speed at which we accomplish the vision by their giving. And I love that, and they've experienced some tremendous things at Church of the Highlands. Next thing is offer personal finance and estate gift planning workshops. I've talked to you about that to help your church families learn to manage well and live generously. Conduct a stewardship assessment for your church to see how well your church is doing in the area of stewardship training and discipleship. And speaking of doing an annual stewardship assessment, I think this was generated, if I'm not mistaken, is this your office that put this together with there was a church-wide assessment tool that was used for church. Yeah, and this stewardship assessment was a part of that. And there were 10 questions, and after reading each statement, you would determine, is this something that my church does consistently, usually, occasionally, rarely, or never? And here they are. Our church teaches people to manage every aspect of their life, time, talents, and money in a way that glorifies God. Second, our church offers programs that systematically develop personal financial management and accountability to God. 3, our members receive regular, accurate reports and updates about our church's financial resources. 4, our church plans and schedules ministries as a model of good time management. 5, our church encourages believers to use their talents and gifts for volunteer service. Number 6, our church provides opportunities for members to support cooperative denominational initiatives. 7, our leaders align the annual budget with the church's vision and priorities. 8, our leaders base our church budget on 90% of last year's actual giving in order to build in a margin and save for planned or unplanned opportunities or expenses. 9, our church fulfills our denominational financial obligations. And 10, last but not least, our church teaches and encourages every member to tithe. All right, just a few more suggestions and then I'll flip over here again. Provide monthly financial reports. Stan Toller says informed givers are happy givers. And you can make these reports available in the lobby in your church, online, or by request, but make it available so that they know that you as a church are being responsible with the resources that they're entrusting to them, to you as church leaders. Second thing is share monthly stewardship articles or blogs. You can share stories of people living a generous life and experience the blessing and favor of God. Maybe dedicate a place on your church website or on social media. And then send quarterly giving statements. Sending statements quarterly rather than annually allows for regular givers to receive a more frequent reminder of their current giving. You know how it is, out of sight, out of mind. So why wait till the end of the year? Send them quarterly. And the other benefit of doing that is it also allows opportunities to correct any bookkeeping errors before sending year-end giving statements. Provide online giving opportunities. I can't stress this enough. More than 60% of the income at my local church comes from online giving. There are a lot of organizations that provide this service. The organization my church uses is called Stewardship Technologies, and one thing we've also done in our church is to help those like me who give online and the basket goes by and you have nothing to put in because you already gave. It's a little card here that says, I gave online as an act of worship. Please place this card in the offering. And it talks about how to do that if you don't already give online and you want to do that. So that's a nice card and a good way to help people participate in the act of worship even though they gave online. Express gratitude for your people's generosity. People shouldn't give expecting to be thanked, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't thank them from time to time. And then celebrate what God has done through the generosity of God's people in your local church. Maybe you raise funds and you help people, provided meals for the homeless, or you sent funds to help with some kind of flood relief or other natural disaster, or whatever it may be. Celebrate that in a very positive way about what God is doing through the faithfulness of the people in your church. All right, so we're getting close to the end. Hang in there with me. In the next few minutes we have left, I'd like to share with you what I think it means to experience the blessing and favor of God. If you have your Bibles or you have it on your phones or your devices, turn with me in Malachi chapter 3, classic passage on this subject. I'd like to read verses 10 through 12, and then we're going to jump over to verses 16 through 18. If you don't have your Bibles with you, I've got it on the screen. It's kind of small. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that you will not have room enough for it. I will prevent pests from devouring your crops, and the vines in your fields will not cast their fruit, says the Lord Almighty. Then all the nations will call you blessed, for yours will be a delightful land, says the Lord Almighty. Then those who feared the Lord talked with each other, and the Lord listened and heard. A scroll of remembrance was written in his presence concerning those who feared the Lord and honored his name. They will be mine, says the Lord Almighty, in the day when I make up my treasured possession. I will spare them just as in compassion a man spares his son who serves him. And you will again see the distinction between the righteous and the wicked, between those who serve God and those who do not. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing you will not have room enough for it. Now I know that there are many different ways that we experience God's blessing and favor in our life. And if we had time and we went around the room, it would be really exciting to hear all the stories and examples of the different ways that God has blessed you through the years. But for the sake of time, just let me share with you real quick to close up 3 ways that I believe we experience God's blessing and favor. Here's the first one, through his provision. And I think that's pretty clear and evident in this passage. During my last couple of years in undergraduate school at United Wesleyan College, many moons ago, 1978, 9, 80, I graduated in 80. My wife and I we were really blessed. We had trouble the first couple of years we were married, trying to pay our way through school. That got challenging. Karen finished her associate's degree. She then supported me. And what we did was we started working for a foster care agency called Concerned Professional Services for Children and Youth. We took care of abused and delinquent boys out of Philadelphia. We had 6 boys living with us at one time, ages 4 to 17. 3 of them we had for the full 2.5 years that we were there. They paid us incredibly well. We couldn't believe that they would hire 23, 24-year-olds to be foster parents, but they must have been hard up. They took us. And God was faithful and blessed us. And we had a great time with these guys. During that same time, I was a part-time youth pastor at a Nazarene church in town. It's another story how I ended up there, but it was a great experience. And then at that same time, after my sophomore year in college, I bought out a friend of mine who had a painting business, who was a student. We had ladders and all this stuff, and we would go around bid houses in the summertime and hire our college mates to come help us, and we'd paint houses. So I did that along those 2.5 years. So it's not a huge amount of money, but back in 1980, our annual salary when I graduated from college was $40,000. We had a brand new 9-passenger station wagon. It was a Colt Oldsmobile Cutlass station wagon. I drove a little beat-up Volkswagen that I bought for $100. Karen drove that car, but we needed the space for our foster boys. Fast forward, and then we're graduating, and I'm studying education, have a passion for Christian education. The church where my dad was pastoring, and I'd only been there a short time, he moved in the middle of my senior year, which I wasn't real excited about, but I flippantly said, well, if we have to move, I hope there's a cute blonde there. And the family that hosted us when my dad candidated was my wife's family. And 2 months later, on Valentine's Day, we started dating, and 2 years later, we married. And she's my sweetheart, and we married 44 years this May. And but we got a call to go back The church voted to start a Christian school, which terrified my father because he knew nothing about them. He couldn't believe that the board even voted in favor of doing this. So they extended a call, knowing that I was studying education, and asked if I would come help them. So we went to help start this private Christian school. But it was a brand new ministry, and so they didn't have a lot of resources. So my starting salary for the annual salary for that position was $6,900 a year. So if you do the math, that's $3.31 an hour. That was the beginning of Money 101 for us. And thank goodness for a retired pastor who did our taxes, and a godly insurance man at a Baptist church in town who was a great mentor to Karen and I, and took us through these steps that I just shared with you to get us going down the right path and prepare well for our family. We kept tithing. We believed in the principle of tithing. We knew this was important. Never second-guessed God at all, and he was faithful. Now, serving at the school, I had an undergrad degree in education, but I knew if I'm going to serve well, I need to go on for a master's degree. There were only two places that I knew of at the time that were offering a master's in educational administration during the summer months so that I could continue serving during the school year. And at the same time I was doing this, my wife was completing an RN degree, her 2-year RN degree. So I'd go for a summer, and we'd all go for a summer of school for my graduate studies. She'd go fall and spring semester for nursing. I'd go to my second summer, and then she'd go to fall and spring semester for her second year of nursing, and then I went to the third summer. And in order to do that, we sold everything we had. We didn't have much left. And moved in with my parents. They were empty nesters. They had 5 bedrooms. We took over 2 of them with our 2 children. And that's how we were making it work. So we sold everything. I had a motorcycle, which was my second car, an old motorcycle. Sold that, sold some other things. We ended up going to Pensacola Christian College in Florida, mainly because we were using the ABECA curriculum, and that's where it was from. Also looked at Grace Seminary in Indiana. They had a great program as well, and I really liked it. But we ended up going, stayed in an efficiency apartment that a Wesleyan church had down there in the area, and all we had to do was pay for the utilities while we were there 6 weeks. And I had classes from 8 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon every day. One class was 8 days long, so I had a midterm in 4 days, the final exam in 8 days. My wife typed all my papers on a manual portable typewriter while we were doing this. And so we got through the first semester, and now I'm coming up on the second semester, and we don't have anything left to sell. And Pensacola did not participate. I don't know if they do now, but they didn't participate in the federal loan grant program, so we basically were paying as we went. So we knew we needed to start praying. So we were praying and asking God for help. My dad had staff guys preach. I'm not a preacher. I'm terrified of public speaking. I've told these guys before I got here, I was terrified just to do this. But he made me speak. Every month there was a 5th Sunday, was my Sunday, and we promoted the ministry of the school during that time. We had 2 services. The church was running about 900 at the time. I preached both services. After the service, one of our leading laymen, he was an executive director of the AAA motor club in town. He asked to have lunch with me. He had never done this before, and so I thought, did I say something wrong when I was preaching that he wanted to take this young preacher boy out and straighten me out? And so I said, yeah, sure, I'd be glad. So we made an appointment. I met with him on Wednesday. He took me to the restaurant, and he was so gracious and affirming and so kind through that whole lunchtime. And I still wondered what's coming. And after we were done, he just looked at me and he said, Larry, God's been so good to me and Betty, and we're so grateful for the sacrifice you and Karen are making. He reached in his coat and brought out a check. It was folded over. He said, it's not much, but we just wanted to give you a small token of our appreciation, let you know how much we appreciate what you're doing. And I was just humbled. I didn't look at it. I just put it in my pocket. I went home, and I actually forgot about it because I went back to the school, finished my day. I got home, and Karen said, how did your meeting go with Gail Olson? That was his name, Old Sweet. I said it was great. He was unbelievably kind and generous and gracious and affirming. And oh yeah, he gave me a check, and I took it out and I opened it up. It was exactly what I needed for a full semester of graduate school. That was a small token of appreciation. All I'm saying to you is this: God is faithful, and He provides. The second way I think we experience His blessing is through His protection. I'm trying to hurry. Randy told me he was going to a 10 after, so just 2 more and we're done. Through His protection. Now I know we live in a fallen, broken world. Things happen to good people. Just ask Job. You know the story. But I also am a firm believer that there are so many times that God has been faithful in protecting us. Many times we don't even know about it. And so let me just share with you one of them. I come from a family of 8 children. One is a foster sister, but we own her like a sister, and we're her family. 5 boys in our family. My dad is an outdoorsman. We're all outdoorsmen. We love to hunt and fish. And as often as we were able, until my dad was not able to go out anymore, we would rendezvous together in the hills of Pennsylvania and go hunting. Now, before I share this illustration, no animals were harmed in this illustration. We were whitetail hunting in Pennsylvania, and the way we did it there is it was a lot of hills, and we would post people up about a half mile or so down the road. They'd go up on the hill and post up. We were very familiar with the terrain. And then others would go up on the hill, and we would just slowly work our way and hunt towards them and try to nudge the game in their direction. When I got up on the hill, it was just the first thing in the morning, and when we got daylight, I looked up and there's 3 deer standing 75 yards away from me. It was doe season. I had a doe permit. This is perfect. I mean, this is so easy. So I took a leading rest on a tree. I had a rifle with a scope, lined it up, took the shot, and all 3 deer just kind of perked up and looked. Never ran. I missed them entirely. And I thought, wow, I'm not Daniel Boone, but I've got a scope. Surely I can hit this deer. So they're still there, and so I'm anxious. So I go to chamber I ejected the shell into chamber another round, and the bolt would not close on my rifle. I could not get it to close to save my life. I thought, well, must be the shell. I ejected another one. I got another shell out, tried another one. I tried every shell I had in my pocket. Wouldn't work, so the deer walked away. I was done and finished my walk through and met up with my dad and brothers, and they just thought I was too dumb to know how to work the gun, so they all took a turn, and it would work. So my dad knew a gunsmith at the church where he pastored down in Cherryville. He said, "You want me to take the gun and have this guy look at it?" And I said, "That'd be great." So he took it, and then between deer season and Christmas, Dad and I were talking, and he said, "Hey, I heard back from the gunsmith." I said, "What'd you find out?" He said, "Interesting thing is, when he got the gun, the bolt works fine. There's no issues with the bolt whatsoever." But he said after further inspection on the gun, he discovered there was a piece, evidently, of the casing of the last shell he fired that had wedged itself in the barrel of the gun. And he said, if your son had chambered around, he pulled the trigger. He said, surely there was someone looking out for him. And that was when I could sense and feel. There was a whole host of angels, I'm sure, standing around me saying, whatever you do, don't let him close that bolt. He's faithful. The last one I want to share with you is through his presence. Through his presence. I think that's why he says in this passage in Malachi, there will be my treasured possession. How many grandparents? Any grandparents here? It's awesome, isn't it? It is. It is. Well, Karen and I, our daughter, our oldest child, had a tough start in her married life. My oldest grandson, Taryn, his father decided after my daughter became pregnant, he wasn't interested in being a husband or a dad, so he bailed. So my daughter moved back 2 states away from us, in with us, through a pregnancy, and then lived with us for about 2 years after that. So I really developed a close bond with this little guy. My oldest grandson, his name is Tarrin, T-A-R-R-I-N. And I used to go pick him up from childcare because Heather would be working crazy hours. And so he was with us, and we just really had, even to this day, he's 18 years old now. He's the one who got the tax return. And I'd been traveling, Jim. I was out in California. It was when I was in Stewardship Ministries at the youth conference I think we had out there. But so it was in the winter time, and I got back home, and Heather was working. Karen had Taryn upstairs, was around 7 or so, giving him a bath. He was about 2 years old. And it was chilly, Indiana, December, so I went in, flipped the switch on the fireplace, and just kind of warmed up. And Taryn knew that I'd come home because Karen told him, hey, Papa, that's what he calls me, Papa's home. So I could hear him upstairs hollering to me, Papa, while she's trying to get him dried off and keep him from running down wet and naked. And got him dried off, got his feet pajamas on, and he come running down the stairs, 1 stair at a time with his short little legs, got to the bottom, jumped, ran over to me at the fireplace and put his arms up, and instead of saying hold me, he came out, help me, Papa. So I picked him up, and he lays his head on my shoulder and starts patting me on the back. And I had one of those God moments where I just kind of looked up and said, is this how it is when we seek your face, crawl up in your lap, and dwell in your presence? Is this how you feel? Because this is an awesome feeling. And there can be no greater feeling than to dwell in the presence of the Creator of the universe, our Redeemer and Savior, Christ Jesus. Even if I never experienced his blessing through his provision or his protection, to experience his presence, to know that we can dwell with him in such an intimate way is an unbelievable blessing in and of itself. Look at this verse It sums it up so well. In Psalm 31:19, it says, "How great is the goodness you have stored up for those who fear you. You lavish it on those who come to you for protection, blessing them before the watching world. You hide them in the shelter of your presence." Now, as I wrap up, I just want to call your attention to one more thing. In that chapter 3, verse 10, we read over it, but you probably are familiar with it. It says, "Test me in this. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse," says the Lord Almighty. Test me in this. And I've studied, you do a search, tell me if I'm wrong, but I've looked hard. This is, as far as I can tell, this is the only place anywhere in Scripture where God says, "Test me." Only place. There's a lot of places where he says, "Do not test the Lord your God." Even when Jesus was being tempted, he quoted, "Do not test the Lord your God." But here, in this passage, when he says, "Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse," test me in this. Why is he saying that? I believe it is because he is so anxious to prove to us that he is faithful and that he will respond, if we will respond in humble obedience and bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that he will open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing you will not have room enough for it. So here's my closing, okay? In closing, here's my challenge. Let's teach people of faith to manage well what God has entrusted to their care and to bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. Let me come back to what I said earlier at the beginning. I am convinced with every fiber of my being that if every person of faith would bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, you would have more than enough resources to fund the ministry of your local church. So let's teach them. Let's equip them and encourage them to live the generous life so they can help to fund the fulfillment of the Great Commission. And let's all live the generous life as an example and a model for others to follow, because I believe this is the best way of funding your church's vision. All right, I'm done, but I have some gifts for you, all of you. If you guys wouldn't mind, got a book for you. Take that home, share it with somebody if you haven't already, if you want. And then before you go, don't go yet, because we're going to give you those books. Which one you guys will come up? Isaac?